If you've watched a lot of films, I can guarantee that you've sat through the entirety of the credits at least once. Whether you paid attention is another question. But maybe you have. You might have looked to see if you spotted someone you knew of in the cast list, what songs were featured so you can create a playlist. You may have even looked to see which one of the main cast and crew members had an assistant. But there is one person I know you've never paid attention to: the editor. I would imagine you know what an editor is, but in case not, they are the person who takes all the material and combines it into a final product. It's a long process, often taking months or sometimes even years, and it is extremely difficult and precise, but they're never paid much attention. Sometimes, the editor for a film does more than just one role. While it is not typical in big budget films, some directors may edit their own films. An example of this is Sean Baker, who has edited nearly every film he has directed, including the brand new film Anora. Quentin Tarantino both directed and edited his first ever film, which is the same for Christopher Nolan. James Cameron has edited 3 of his feature films, including Avatar, while Damien Leone has been the director, writer and editor of all 3 Terrifier films. When the director edits the film, it results in their complete and idealistic vision. However, when an editor creates the final product, the director may not be entirely satisfied with it, which leads to the existence of director's cuts. Ridley Scott and Zack Snyder are famous for this, but many other directors have also participated, wishing for people to view their true vision, mostly leading to a substantially enlarged runtime. Yes, there is an Oscar and a BAFTA for Best Editing, but do you know the name of any film editors? Who was the editor on the last film you watched? There are many editors who get no recognition by the public, but I want to focus on one specifically. Lee Smith. Lee Smith was born on the 10th of June 1960 in Sydney, Australia. Not much is known about his upbringing, but we do know that his family were an influence of him getting into the film industry.
I started in film in 1976. My father was an optical effects technician at a film lab in Australia, and my uncle co-owned a lab. My auntie was an egg matcher and my brother was a cameraman. So I just didn't have a choice. I did actually, and I really wanted to join the film industry. And then my father was diligently ringing all the people he knew in town, and I got an opportunity to work at a company called Film Production Services in Sydney. And coming, completely fresh to everything, I went into a facility where I think one of my first jobs was vacuuming and making the tea. Aside from that,
he began his career in sound editing, as well as film editing, and worked on a variety of smaller films. He was credited as an associate editor on Peter Weir's film, The Year of Living Dangerously, who he worked with as an additional film editor on 2 more of his films, including Dead Poets Society.
Words and language. No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
He also worked with George Miller as an additional picture editor, and is sound editor for 3 of Jane Campion's films, including The Portrait of a Lady. He was credited as many different types of editors across his filmography, but mostly began with smaller level films. He returned to Peter Weir for Fearless, and was an editor for RoboCop 2. After smaller works, he returned to his partnership with Peter Weir to be a co-editor for The Truman Show starring Jim Carrey. The film went on to be a major success, both box office and critic-wise, and it was a great chance for Smith to show off his talents to a wider audience. He continued doing movies for a few years, until Peter Weir returned to ask him to be the sole editor for his new film, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, which starred Russell Crowe.
Do you see those 2 weevils, Doctor?
I do.
Which would you choose?
Neither. There's not a scrap of difference between them. They're the same species of Curculio.
Lee Smith was clearly committed to the partnership with Weir, as he turned down an invite from Peter Jackson to edit the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which are loved even to this day. However, it was a worthy risk, as he enjoyed the process and complimented Weir's talents. When the Oscar nominations for 2004 released, Smith was nominated for his work, and that level of recognition caught the eye of someone who was tasked with directing a reboot of Batman for Warner Bros. Christopher Nolan was interested in employing Smith to edit Batman Begins, but Smith was initially reluctant, saying he didn't want to work on a superhero film. Nolan was quick to convince him, however. Lee said, "When I met Chris, he persuaded me that he was going to treat the subject with a great level of seriousness. He had answers for everything." End quote. The film ended up being a massive success.
I'm Batman.
Starting a new subgenre of superhero films, and an iconic start to a trilogy for many years to come. This collaboration with Nolan paved the way for the next section of his career.
Editor, how would you describe the duties and responsibilities that you had for Interstellar?
You basically assemble each sequence as it's being shot. Not all sequences can be complete, but they can be complete to a certain point. Even the visual effects sequences, you have to start to assemble them with a view that you know there's in this film, a giant wave, for example, or something happening. I started editing on film, now we edit digitally, so you have to make that transition. The digital platforms are evolving all the time, so you have to basically, you're learning new steps the whole way.
This partnership with Nolan continued for many years. He edited The Prestige, starring Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, before moving on to The Dark Knight.
I'm gonna make this pencil disappear. It's gone.
Smith had previously worked with Heath Ledger on an early film, and was astounded by his camera presence. Smith said, "I couldn't believe they were considering casting him as the Joker. When I watched the first day of dailies, it was a shot on a street corner with Heath standing there with a clown mask before getting into an SUV. But he had his back to the camera the whole time. It was just extraordinary. He owned the whole screen by the way he stood." End quote. He went on to get another Oscar nomination for his editing, as well as his first BAFTA nomination, and the film was a smash hit. Between his next film with Christopher Nolan, he came back to work with Peter Weir on The Way Back, which was a critical success, but a complete financial flop. This film, however, marked the end of his decade-plus-long partnership with Weir. Smith said, "Some directors rely on storyboards and arrive on set with a very accurate plan of what they will shoot. Peter just responds to what he sees on the day and will change tack when he realizes something is not working. His process is organic." He came back to edit Inception for Nolan, which earned him another BAFTA nomination, before going on to direct a very different superhero film for another director, Matthew Vaughn. The film was intended as a reboot for the X-Men franchise, and was very successful at doing that, even if its place in the timeline became very confusing. When he was piecing together the film, he spoke to Flickering Myth about it, and stated he was pleased with the work. Smith said, "With less than 5 months until release, it's a big film being done in a short amount of time. It's going to be intense, but so far what I've got has been very good. Everyone is very happy with it, so fingers crossed." End quote. After the X-Men, he returned to Batman for the conclusion of the trilogy, The Dark Knight Rises.
With no survivors!
This was his 5th film with Christopher Nolan, but it was not his last. He took a year break from Nolan and edited 2 films, Elysium, starring Matt Damon and Jodie Foster, and Ender's Game, starring Haley Steinfeld and Harrison Ford. Elysium did well at the box office, but Ender's Game was a failure, with a predicted $70 million loss for the studio. Elysium was received to disappointing but positive reviews, and Ender's Game was also received fairly well. Despite doing 2 films in a single year, his next work is the most loved by the public, Interstellar. It was received positively and was a smash hit at the box office, although he only understood parts of the film. Smith joked, "I had no idea what that bookcase scene was about."
Hey, Merv. Don't let me leave, Merv. Don't let me leave, Merv.
Well, my job as predominantly a feature film editor is to, first of all, read the script that the director's intending to make and see if there's anything in there that I want to pass on comment-wise as far as how it reads. And then basically be there for the entire time of the shoot. And again, you know, it's basically my responsibility to keep up with the camera, make sure that you're editing each sequence as best as you can. I mean, everything's shot out of order, but you do what you can. Make sure it makes sense and make sure you've got the coverage to do whatever you might want to do with it. And then it was just a matter of continuous processing to get it to the point where we felt the audience could sit through this reasonably complicated pathway, still enjoy it, and even if a few of them didn't quite catch what was happening, they'll catch up with it. Good confusion versus bad confusion. In the last 9 years of his career, he has worked with 4 different directors, 2 of which he had previously done work for. His first film post-Interstellar was the Daniel Craig Bond film Spectre. He then returned to Nolan for his 7th and final film with the director, Dunkirk, which got him another BAFTA nomination, as well as an Oscar win for Best Editing. He stated that due to the film containing 3 different narratives at land, sea and air, he edited the 3 individually at first, making them each a flowing separate narrative, before intertwining them.
And the Oscar goes to Dunkirk, Lee Smith.
This is the first Oscar and 3rd nomination for Lee Smith. He was previously nominated in this category for The Dark Knight and Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World.
Dunkirk was truly the most amazing film, and I'm very fortunate to have worked on it. I'd also like to thank my beautiful wife sitting over there, Kimberly.
He then returned to the X-Men universe for Dark Phoenix, which was a critical and box office failure. However, the disappointment was quickly forgotten with 1917. He was very involved with Sam Mendes, talking to the director on set from his editing studio in Soho, and the film was completed in 9 months. Smith said, "9 months all up is pretty short for a film of this size. Normally I'd be on it for more like 12 months. To shoot and edit a film to look like it had been captured in a single continuous shot, there was a lot of planning by Mendes to ensure it would be possible for the editor." Lee stated, "I was on for some prep work where we were just discussing some of where the joins would have to be. Really it was just theoretical. We had sort of sketches of what they would be and how they would work. Some of them appeared simple, some of them appeared incredibly complex, but until you shoot it, you don't really know what the conditions are. It's a tricky way of making a movie, not for the faint-hearted." The hard work paid off, however. As the editing was praised online, many confounded at how they made the film appear as one shot. Then,
you must stay at home.
COVID happened. He did not work on a single film for 3 years, until Sam Mendes called again and asked him to edit his new film, Empire of Light, starring Olivia Colman. There was then a final 2-year gap before Matthew Vaughn returned to ask him to work on his new film, Argylle. Despite being received to fairly negative reviews, the editing of action sequences in the film was still praised, specifically a particular sequence in which it shifts between 2 actors doing the same stunts. He has an impressive collection of awards and nominations, housing a singular Oscar as well as having 3 Oscar nominations and 3 BAFTA nominations. He has stated in many interviews that he was not on set when the material was filmed, and instead discussed what was happening with the director, as he preferred to edit stuff as it was shot. It is unclear why Christopher Nolan and Sam Mendes were dedicated to keeping him for their films, but it is likely that they were purely impressed with their previous work and enjoyed the style of editing that Lee Smith held. The work that was most liked by the public was his editing on Interstellar, which is best detailed by a video titled "Interstellar's Editing is Out of This World" by This Guy Edits, in which he explains the effect that Smith is able to create with his editing, taking something unexplainable to the audience and injecting it with emotion and meaning. He also has another video covering Dunkirk's editing and how it is a snowball of suspense. While Smith does not hold a specific style of editing, he was clear about what his thoughts on editing is. From all of his work, it is very clear that his editing is meticulous and with purpose. He puts careful consideration into his work, from everything such as the video, down to how the audio will play with it. He only edits something if it needs to be edited. Let's look at two scenes from his films. The first is the scene of Miller's planet in Interstellar. At the beginning of the scene, the editing is very gentle, smooth, and infrequent, as we discover this new planet and take in the sights, as our characters do. However, as the music builds in the background, the cuts become more frequent and abrupt, building a sense of tension and revealing to the audience that something is about to happen. When the wave is revealed and the characters are in danger, the music increases in volume, the camera work becoming shaky and the editing quick to create a sense of urgency. Another viewpoint for having less cuts at the beginning of the scene is to represent how much time is passing with every second they are on the planet. The second scene is Batman's interrogation of the Joker in The Dark Knight. Smith employs similar techniques to his work in Interstellar, as the scene begins calm and collected as Gordon talks to the Joker and Batman begins his interrogation. But when Joker reveals the hidden twist that he has kidnapped both Harvey Dent and Rachel, the editing becomes frantic and manic, representing the anger that Batman is now feeling, and also the embodiment of chaos that is the Joker. The scene also does not edit to another shot when there is violence, which gives it a newfound sense of brutality, as we have to witness the pure aggression instead of having it blocked from our sight like earlier in the film. Smith said, "The main thing when you're working on features is assembling and editing everything that comes in on a daily basis. Even if scenes are only half done, then I'll half put them together, because the job of the editor is to inform anyone if we're missing something or something's not working. They're heavily reliant on you to be that person, because obviously these features cost between $300,000 and $400,000 a day. You don't want to find out you need something else after they've left the set or basically demolished it. I personally believe this is a very good ideology to work with, as by starting the edit at the beginning of production, it saves having to put all the footage together at once, and begins to give you an idea of what the final edit might become, as well as saving the production money." Smith continued, "You're the voice of reason. Sometimes they call me the voice of doom, but it's best to take your medicine when you can do something about it. You're watching for everything: performance coverage, coverage problems, technical problems. All of these things have to be assessed. If there's a technical problem, is it salvageable? Can I make a considered guess as to whether a shot can be resurrected through digital effects? You do that on a daily basis. You're trying to make sure the film is working even though it's still being built in front of your eyes. You do the best to make sure that the film is going to work, because as soon as they finish shooting, they finish shooting. You have to stay up to camera. You can't be a week behind the camera, because you won't be giving them daily updates if they need to do anything different. I personally believe this is very important. As you're the final person to view the footage before it is entered into the edit, you're the final person who can spot mistakes in the footage before it is irredeemable. You hold a lot of responsibility, as you can save them lots of money having to reshoot material." Now that you've watched the documentary, next time you watch a film and the credits roll, and just take a moment to look at who edited the film, remember that name. Just from that, you're giving them appreciation for their hard work.
Movies, they're an illusion. Literally a magic trick. Still frames projected on the screen to trick the eye into seeing movement and life. Now, it's true that we make the movie in production, but we sculpt the movie in the editing room. where real magic happens by cutting those frames together on a precise order that creates an emotional impact and tells a story. Since 1934, the Academy has recognized the women and the men whose skill for combining distinct images has elevated the art of movie making.